Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, wherever you're at, whenever you're listening. Welcome back or welcome to the Raising Kingdom Warriors podcast. I'm your host, Joel Pellin, where the mission is simple. We want to add value to you today. We want to add value to you as men, as husbands, as fathers, and as leaders. And today we have a special guest, Brett Clemmer. Brett is the president and CEO of Man in the Mirror Ministry, dedicated to helping men grow in their faith, become godly leaders in their homes, churches, and communities. Passionate about discipleship and leadership development, Brett has spent years equipping men to navigate life's challenges through biblical wisdom and intentional community. His work focuses on empowering men to live with purpose, integrity, and deep commitment to Christ. We're honored and blessed to have him on. Brett, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. Great to be with you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your help. For those of you that are listening, had some technical difficulties, so we're making it happen, and I appreciate your flexibility and your help with that. I wanted to just jump right into things. Talk to me a little bit about Man in the Mirror Ministry.
Yeah, Man in the Mirror started in 1986, actually as a Bible study in a bar in Central Florida, in Winter Park, Florida, just outside of Orlando. Pat Morley was a really well respected and successful real estate developer, and he was on the board of Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ back then, and Dr. Bill Bright suggested that he begin a Bible study for businessmen in the community, and so that's what he did. So started off with a few guys meeting on a Friday morning in a sports bar that was somebody's friend owned, and it quickly grew. Pat's a pretty very very gifted teacher, and so that the Bible study grew, and then
for the listeners, for the listeners who haven't heard yet, if you go back to previous episodes, we had Patrick Morley on, so you guys can listen to him talk about a couple of his other books and missions. But just wanted to give Pat that plug for the previous episode really quick. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that Bible study still goes on today. It's called the Man Alive Bible Study. And if you're ever in Florida on a Friday morning, 7 to 8, First Baptist Church in Orlando, Pat's there doing his thing, and has anywhere from 75 to 100 guys every week. And so that's great. As Pat sort of kept teaching, it sort of turned into a writing bug, and he wrote his first book in 1989 called The Man in the Mirror. And that book did really really well. It's funny. It sat on the shelves and in the warehouse for 6 or 8 months, and the publisher, a little bit out of desperation, I think, made a deal with the Family Christian stores and said, we'll send a handful of free copies to every store if you'll send a letter out to your pastor's list, 1989 letters, and
Right.
and sent a letter out to their pastor list and said, hey, if you go into the store, we'll give you a free copy of this men's book. And so about 6 months after they did that, suddenly the book exploded. So what they think happened is pastors went in, got the book, brought it back, gave it to their men's ministry guy or an elder or deacon in their church, and sort of the rest is history. So Pat's written 24 books, and the ministry has really just been laser focused on helping men become disciples of Jesus and follow Christ more closely. Pat's written books on all kinds of different topics: spiritual disciplines, vocation, marriage, fathering. And so we sort of stand on his shoulders. And the ministry continues to move forward. We do a lot of leadership training in churches. We have area directors around the country that act as free consultants to churches. And then lately, we've been really focusing on mentoring, and not the kind of mentoring that is like Boy Scouts or Christian Service Brigade or anything, like not boys and men, but young men and mature Christian men, as we're really seeing the issues that younger guys are facing today, and just how hard it is.
Yeah. You and I were talking, speaking about those younger guys, we were talking before we hit record today about Gen Z and how that generation is turning to the church more than ever.
Yeah.
This younger generation of kids they're thirsty for something.
Yeah.
And whatever they're thirsty for is not being quenched by what the world is offering them right now.
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that since we're in that space right now with
Yeah,
Gen Z and younger generation. Yeah.
yeah, got in their 20s, and I don't we don't really focus on teenagers much. There's plenty of people doing great work with teenagers, so
Yeah.
we're trying to really focus on that sort of 20, early 20s to early 40s group, and there is definitely a difference between the guys in their 20s and the guys in their 30s. Some big differences. But the younger guys are, for the first time in history that we've been keeping track of these statistics, more there's an age group where more men are in church than women. If
Mm.
you are young and conservative these days, and male, you're more likely than not to be a member of a church or regularly attending a church.
And that also, is good for the church and good for our culture, because the study out there, I was just talking to a pastor down at Rio Vista in Florida. So there's a recent study, I can't remember what country it came out of, but that when the father leads, when the men lead in the church, his children and his wife tend to follow more often than not when they're
Yeah.
attending church regularly and laying that foundation.
Yeah, there's some crazy statistics out there that sound better than they are validated, but we do know that when men lead, um, that families follow. You can see even in the secular podcast world, and all the videos that are out there now. There's really sort of this, I would call it almost like a backlash against the effects of feminism on women, and
Right.
and how people are seeing that this sort of attack on masculinity has really hurt. It's hurt men for sure, but it's probably hurt women even more, because
Yeah.
it's just pushing them into roles and into, in the secular world. If I was a secular guy, and was, first of all, if I'm in college, it's a field day because there's twice as many women as men in most colleges. And then there's this this sexual revolution that doesn't really bring freedom, that brings slavery. But these women, that there's just this like push for women to be sexually active, because like that's, we're like going to take that back from men. And so the
Yeah.
guys are in this great secular in the secular world, guys are in this great place where feminism sort of feeding into all the base sinful instincts that a guy might
Yeah.
have. And
I would also imagine that pornography has a pretty heavy role in that shift of what sex looks like, what it should be, and what they see are two different things. Would you say that's somewhat part of the issue as well?
Absolutely. I've got a one of our ministry partners is a retired Army intelligence, and he's talked to me about some of the research they've done in the military. And so I'll give you a couple weird things to think about. So first of all, the young men in the military are reporting record levels of sexual dysfunction, and what they've basically said is they've watched so much porn that and if you watch, for most guys that watch porn, it tends to get, you know weirder and
Progressively weirder and
kinkier
way
and,
down. Yeah.
yeah, abusive and or wild, and so, well, reality's not like that. And so they're literally, it's like numbing their brains, numbing the centers that deal with arousal, and so they can't function, they can't sexually function. And this is documented in the military now with young guys. And I'll tell you, if you look at, there's commercials, you've probably seen them, I've seen them, commercials online, on a lot of social media ads for, like, I don't want to name brands, but companies that will get you erectile dysfunction drugs. Look at the models in the ads. They're all guys in their
Yeah.
20s and 30s. It used to be 20
Yeah.
years ago, it was guys in their 50s and 60s, and Bob Dole
Yeah.
back in the day, right? But
Yeah.
now it's not. Now it's guys in their 20s and 30s. And why are they marketing to them? Because they're actually dysfunctional, and porn's a great, great cause for that.
Yeah. It's definitely something that our culture is fighting. And, I also think too, as a father, one of the things that I'm trying to navigate is how my daughters find their identity,
Wow.
because what I'm seeing a lot of is and the data is clear, right? The earlier you give a child a smartphone, the more likely they are to have suicide ideation, anxiety, and depression. Like that is not something that's up for debate. That's been pretty much proven. And what I'm seeing a lot of is these girls, they get on social media, and what do they see? Well, as they're scrolling through, they see girls that are barely dressed, dancing around, doing these stupid dances. And, but when you look at the likes that they're getting like hundreds of thousands of likes. And so in the girl's mind, they start seeing that, well, that's where value is. That's how I can add value. And that starts to become part of who they are, instead of grounding themselves in the simple identity that they're the daughter of the king. And that's a dead stop. Um, and so, like, I remember even like 8 years ago, I remember talking to a friend of mine at the time, and he was talking to me about his niece. And he said, yeah, my niece put this picture up on Instagram and, looked good. And, I went to go show it to my mom. Now, he first started the conversation like, what's going on with these girls and the social media stuff? So he goes to show it to his mom, the girl's grandma, like, hey, here's a picture of so and so. And it wasn't there anymore. He's like, so I went to her and I was like, hey, where's that picture that you posted the other day? I wanted to show grandma. And she's like, oh, it didn't get enough likes, so I took it down. Right. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so these
Yeah.
girls are starting to get like their identity, that's their value based on how many likes they're able to get from essentially strangers and people they don't really even know.
Yeah.
And that is damaging as well. So just trying to navigate, and fathers, just be intentional with the smartphone. Um, yeah, it's going to cause fights. It's going to cause arguments with you and your child. I get that. I'm already starting to get that with my youngest son, who's 10. Not arguments, but like the wanting the phone because he sees that his classmates have it. And it's like, listen, dude, like their parents are doing whatever they want. Like that's their house. In our house, like you're not going to get a smartphone, because I believe when you give a kid a smartphone with the internet access, you don't give them access to the world, you give the world access to them. And that's a dangerous thing to give at such a young age.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of again, there's a lot of solid research out there and a lot of solid documentation of what smartphones do to kids. If I don't know if you've seen there's a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma that
Hmm.
called The Social Dilemma that
Yeah, you're right.
talks about all the brain chemistry, like how social media is designed to suck you in. It's designed to create chemical reactions in your brain, and it creates an honest to goodness addiction. All of us, yeah, we're doom scrolling
Yeah,
at
I'm
10:30
raising my hand. Like,
sleeping, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, so it's really powerful. I saw a short overview of a documentary that they did in England in the last year. They went to I can't remember what they call it, but it's like a secondary school. It's a high school.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
they were either like eighth, ninth, 10th grade kind of equivalent. And with the parents' permission, they took the phones away from the kids for a month. And
yeah.
like they interviewed the kids and they showed clips from the interviews week by week. So in the first week, the kids were like anxious, depressed,
Hmm.
like, what am I going to do? Angry, that their phones have been taken away. And then the second week, they were like, oh, this isn't
That's so
this
bad.
isn't so bad. Like I'm getting used to it. And the third week, the boys were like, I'm playing with my friends outside, my mates. We're playing outside.
Yeah.
I'm spending more time with my family and more time with my friends than I've ever spent before. But the huge difference was looking at the girls from the first week to the third week, they literally looked like the weight of the world had been taken off their shoulders
Yeah,
because they
man.
didn't have to measure up to anybody else's expectations except the people that were in their immediate circle that they actually cared about and actually cared about them. And then,
Hmm.
like the fourth week, when they knew they were getting their phones back, you could actually see the anxiety beginning to creep back into the kids. Like, this has been really good. I'm looking forward to getting my phone back, but like this has been really good. But the girls looked like they were being sent to an execution, getting
Mm,
their phones back. So you're right.
yeah.
Like Jonathan Haidt, who's wrote The Righteous Mind and the Coddling of the American Mind. He's a
Yeah.
secular Jewish professor in New York City, And he's saying like kids should not have smartphones before they're six. Certainly girls shouldn't have smartphones before they're 16
Yeah.
at the earliest.
Yes. I'm
And
actually reading The Anxious Generation currently,
yeah,
and what he's uncovering there, I think, and I don't get any royalties from this, listeners. I think every single parent should read The Anxious Generation.
mm,
And then if you still decide to give your kid a smartphone at an early age, at least you know what could potentially happen and what's more likely to happen. But what he's uncovering and the mission that he's on, I mean, I thank him for it because it's so important in our culture, and it impacts these kids whose brains aren't fully developed,
right.
and and they're also in these stages of life where they're trying to find themselves, trying to find their identity. And if parents aren't being intentional with building that identity, they're going to find it somewhere else in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So yeah.
it fuels pornography. It fuels like poor self-esteem, suicidal ideation. The other thing it fuels is sexual dysphoria, gender dysphoria, and
Hmm.
again, lots of research out there. Lots of research like from the LGBTQ community
Yeah.
saying this is not healthy. Like this, especially this whole trans. I think I'm hoping it was like a. I don't want to use the word fad because I don't want to
Like a blip in the data.
yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
hoping that, between COVID and isolation, but I saw this woman testifying and she's part of that community. She's a doctor and she's testifying how they went from 4 inquiries a month to 50 to 60 inquiries a month, and the four were normally boys who were feeling like they weren't in the right body.
Yeah.
um, but the growth was all young girls,
Flipped.
all teenage girls, and they actually called it the TikTok tick. They said
Mm.
all the girls came in with the exact same story, the exact same symptoms, the exact same presentation, and they had learned it on social media. And then they're coming in and saying these what we would say, these normal feelings that every teenage girl has, because being a teenage girl sucks.
Yeah,
And
it's tough.
that all those normal feelings, now social media has told you, oh, well, that means that there's something wrong with you, as
Yeah.
opposed to like, this is how life works. You'll work through it. You'll be a stronger person on the other side. Look to Jesus, not to these worldly
Yeah.
solutions that are not going to help you at all.
And there seems to be, at least what I'm seeing is, there seems to be a little bit more of a trend of people coming out saying that they regretted having the
Yeah,
surgery,
yeah,
right? That there's a lot of people out there that are saying, I thought this, I was moved to this, and I had this done, and that's not me. Like I regret going through that whole
yeah,
process.
yeah,
Um, I want to hit on Gen Z one more time because
yeah,
you mentioned the young 20-year-olds. I've been so encouraged by this generation of kids and young adults, I should say. Kids to us because we're old now, even though we don't like to admit that. But these young adults, um, it almost seems like every week there's a new revival on a campus. Like Ohio State's football team really just kind of really like impressed me with how on fire they were for the gospel,
yeah,
the success that they were having. The touchdown celebrations, like one of the running backs did the sign language, Jesus loves you to the camera. They held in the middle of campus. You got your starting football players leading Bible studies, and like, and so I'm just so encouraged by this younger generation. Is there any other thing that you want to add to that, before we move on to the next piece?
yeah. I think there's a lot of like the stigma's been removed. If you read Aaron Renn, he has a Substack called The Masculinist, and he did a great article in the First Things blog about the positive, neutral, and negative world of Christianity, and how Christianity before 94 very much viewed as a positive thing. Even if you weren't a Christian, Christianity was viewed positively, and then sort of neutral to 94 to 14. And then after 2014, Christianity was viewed negatively, and like Christian morals were actually seen as immoral. The easiest example is abortion. we would say that, we believe in the sanctity of life and protecting the unborn. They would say, like, no, you are evil because you are taking autonomy away from women. They would twist our moral beliefs. And
Right. Taking reproductive rights away and all. Yeah.
yeah. And so if the other two sort of eras of that thinking were 20 years each, this one's already over. Like, we're already on the backside of that, and this Gen Z, these 20-year-olds and teenagers are going like that. Up is not down, black is not white, left is not
Yeah.
right. Like, they're like, you can't say that something's true that's actually not true. And I think,
Yeah.
it's sort of back to the 60s, like, trust no one.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's sort of a benefit of this generation, is that they're much more reality based in the sense of, like, they're not believing everything they hear. They're checking things out. They're getting alternative news sources. They're curious. They're curious. Like, I think this is a huge benefit and a huge attribute of Gen Z, is they're honestly curious. They don't just take everything spoon fed to them. And I think it's going to have um, great impact. It's going to have great impact.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that I have found there's some hope in that Gen Z generation to kind of
Yeah.
reorient our culture back upwards towards Christ.
Yeah.
So working with men um, for a long time, what is masculinity,
Ah,
right?
yeah.
Like what is masculinity? Like we have all these different issues. We have biblical masculinity out there. We have toxic masculinity. We have there's so many things trying to be twisted. Like I'm curious, what is
Yeah.
your definition of masculinity?
I love that you asked that. So first of all, let me just say this. I don't believe in differentiating biblical masculinity. Masculinity is masculinity. It's described perfectly in the Bible and exampled perfectly in the Bible. When you put anything else in front of it, you're going 1 or 2 or 10 or 90 degrees off the truth. And so masculinity, I think, is very well exampled in the Bible. It's men who lead, it's men who are willing to make sacrifices, it's men who love, protect, and provide for their families. It's men who take care of the poor and people that don't have as much or aren't as safe as they are. It's a commitment to truth, and it's and I would say it's an understanding of your limitations that drives you to want to have a relationship with God, and an understanding that these roles that you have, these responsibilities that you have, in your own strength, you're probably never going to be able to do it as well as you want to, but with the power of God, you can do it the way that you feel called to do it. And I think every man has sort of we're all made in the imago Dei, in the image of God.
Yeah.
The fingerprint of God is on our souls, and that's why most men are actually noble when you get down to it. Um, and when you take God out of men's lives, you take nobility out of men's lives, and then they're just self-focused and trying to get what they want.
No, I agree with that. I think also when you start putting those taglines before masculinity, you start opening those doors for other definitions of it. And I
Right.
think you described it perfectly there. Um, so, was there an instance or a situation or an event in your life that kind of made you click and be like, man, I need to get into men's ministry? Like, what caused you to kind of or inspired you to get involved with Man in the Mirror Ministries
Yeah.
to really have this calling towards mentoring and discipling men?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the quick version. So, I grew up in Boston, big, huge Boston sports fan to everybody out there. Go Celts. Um, but I got married in '91 in New England, where I grew up. Moved to Florida, and then in '98 I started a software company with some friends. And '98, '99 we're going like gangbusters, and really active in our church. Had a couple of toddlers, and one day I was at work, and it's a startup software company. Like I'm running and gunning. I'm going as fast as I
Yeah.
can. We did $1 million in sales in '99, and I was the only salesperson. And so like I was just gone all the time. We're doing big community-based database systems for social service networks. And so I'm going all over the place, and I knew something wasn't right at home, but I didn't. I was just too focused on work, and so
Yeah.
I called my wife one day and said, "Hey, honey, I'm really sorry. I got another last minute trip. I got to leave. I got to leave tomorrow." And she said a sentence that changed our lives. She said, "That's okay. It's easier when you're not here." And
Mm.
I was like, "Oh, that I don't think that's a good thing." So
Yeah.
I went home that night and I said, "What do you mean it's easier when I'm not here?" And she said, "Look, I get it. You're trying to start this company. You're trying to build something for our family, but like we never see you. You leave in the morning before the kids wake up. Oftentimes you get home after they go to bed, so like they don't really know you that well. When you are home, you're exhausted because you're working so hard." And the worst part of it was we were involved in a large church, and so we were volunteering in the children's ministry, multiple services every
Yeah.
weekend. So what I found I was doing was I was rushing home at the end of every week to go to minister to other people's kids, and then I would abandon my own family on Monday and go to work. So in the midst of that, and my wife saying that to me, a friend called me up, and our wives were in a small group together, a women's group together. And he said, "Hey, I think we should have a men's group with all the husbands of these women that are getting together, because we might need to protect ourselves. I'm pretty sure they're talking about us." And and so I'm like, "Yeah, man, absolutely. What are we you like?" And I grew up in the church. I'm like, "You got to." I've been in small groups before. Like, what are we going to study? We going to read something? What are we going to study? And he says, "I don't know. They gave away some men's book at church a few weeks ago. Just bring that book." And that book was The Man in the Mirror.
Okay.
And so I open the book up, I read the first chapter, the rat race. Well, I could really associate with that. And then the second chapter was leading an unexamined life. And I'm like, oh man. And then the third chapter was called, Are you a cultural Christian or a biblical Christian? And I'm angry, like the guy wrote a book about me, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so I got in this group with these guys, and we start, the book just helped us talk about the right things, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember about 5 or 6 weeks in, my wife and I were still struggling. I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And we were doing a little bit of the sort of Christian men's group thing. Like, how was your week? Oh, I had a very blessed week. Or how was your
Right.
week? Oh, my week was tough, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I'm like, I'm ready to throw up on the table. And so I remember I tossed my book down, I said a few choice words, and I said, this group gets real right now, or I'm done. Because I got real problems, and we need to have real conversations about them.
Mm.
And I,
How was that received?
well, the guy next to me, who was a pastor in the church, said, I can't believe you said that. And I thought I was going to get judged right there. And he says, I've been struggling with pornography and nobody knows about it. And then the
Mm.
next guy said, my marriage is in trouble too, and I don't have anybody to talk to about it. And then the next guy said, my business is struggling. I just took a second mortgage out on my house to make payroll, and I haven't told my wife yet. And like around the table, every guy had some significant issue going on that nobody knew about, that he was bearing alone. Every single guy was a leader in the church. And then we get around to the last guy, this guy named Jim, and he's like sitting there holding his book, and his eyes are like saucers. And he's like, uh, actually, I'm doing pretty good. Like my life's going pretty well right now. I'm not really sure I should be here with you guys. And we're like, Jim, you can't go anywhere. You're our only hope. And
Yeah.
so that group of guys walked with me through 2000, which is when the market tanked and my business fell apart.
Mm.
And so I've got my business falling apart. I'm struggling in my marriage, and these guys just like locked arms and came around me. And so I knew it was making a difference in the midst of the business um, spiraling into bankruptcy. I told my wife one night. like, hey, I'm not going to go to my men's group tonight. I'm just weary. I'm just exhausted. And she said, you know what? That's when you need those guys the most. So go to your group. Like, we'll be here when you get home, but you've been a different man since you've been going to that group. So go and tell your friends, go and tell your brothers what you're going through. That's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so
Amen for our wives, right, man?
absolutely,
Yeah.
man. So that guy Jim, when my company started going out of business, gave my resume to Pat Morley. And so I get a call like right as the business is going under. In November, I get a call from Man in the Mirror saying, "Hey, we got a job opening here. We think a couple people have given us your resume. Would you be willing to come talk to us about it?" And so I walked into Man in the Mirror in November of 2000, so 24 years ago, and walking on eggshells because I'm like, this ministry hired me. I've I've just taken a company into bankruptcy. I almost blew up my marriage. I'm probably a crappy dad. Um, I'm really good at doing things at church, like, but my life is just beginning to exhibit what it should exhibit. And those aren't things that you mention in a job interview. I just sort of
Right. Yeah.
and so a couple months later, I was talking to my boss, and I found out they knew everything when they called me. They already knew everything, and and
Yeah.
and so that became a place of healing and authenticity and reality. And then over time, I just sort of did different jobs in the company until 2016, I became the president.
Awesome. No, that's such a great story and a great journey. And I'm sure that, you know, what is the quote? It says, you are best equipped to help people that you used to be.
Mm,
Something along those
yeah,
lines. I might not
absolutely.
be word for word, but you are best equipped to help people on who you used to be.
Yeah,
And I've seen
but
that in my own life.
yeah,
And
we tell guys your mistakes are your resume.
yeah.
You know, and
Um,
how you dealt with that is what young guys especially need to hear from older guys.
yeah, I want to go back to the conversation that you had with the guys at the table when you stood up, threw the book down, and kind of called everyone to the carpet. Um, because men tend to isolate themselves,
Yep.
right? We tend to put ourselves on our own islands and try to figure things out on our own. I know I'm guilty of it. You feel like you're being a burden to somebody else. You feel like I should be able to handle this, right? I'm the husband, I'm the father. And so we tend to give those just crappy responses. And I also will say, I think we also tend to ask crappy questions because when you ask somebody how they're doing, is that being genuine? Do you really want to know how they're doing? Or is that just like the passing by, like, hey, how's you doing? Good. Like you don't want to really get caught up in deep conversation, but you ask the question anyways to be polite or be friendly. But we need to start being more intentional on asking the question for the real answer, right? Not for the generic, oh, things are good, or yeah, I'm doing all right, or hanging in there, or whatever it is, but really want to know how the men that God's put in our lives, how they're really doing.
Yeah. We have a chaplain at Man in the Mirror for the organization's named Ron Reed, and he's a retired pastor. And Ron has a saying. Ron has taught us all when we say "How you doing" to somebody else, and they'll say whatever they say, and then we always ask, "Okay, how are you really doing?" And it forces us to stop and ask the second question, but it also helps a guy get past that. Oh, I'm doing great, or I'm doing fine, or a couple things here and there, but I'm good. And then you come back with that, how you're really doing, and it opens up crazy conversations.
Yeah, and I think too, like this goes back. I did an episode in July for listeners who want to go back and listen to that with Stephen Mansfield on
He's awesome.
on building a band of brothers and the
Yeah,
importance of finding men in your life. He one of the things he calls him is your 2 a.m. friend, the guy that
right.
you can call at 2 a.m. and just kind of unload to and be there for. How important that is for men to develop and be intentional about it. And it doesn't have to be this massive group of 25 guys or 20 guys. Find three,
Yeah.
right? Find three guys in your life that you can call, that you can kind of open up to, cry to, um, confess things to, so that you're not carrying that around. And then they also know, because there's a lot of vulnerability in that.
Yeah.
And I think vulnerability is something that men in particular don't do very well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the more vulnerable we can be with each other, the healthier we're going to be, both physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, men are, I think, I talk about this often. When Pat started the ministry back in the late 80s, early 90s, like, I think the chief worldly issue was greed. And, a lot of, Wall Street, the movie is a great example. The greed is good, the
Yeah,
Gordon Gekko thing, and people resonated with that. And in the church, the problem was cultural Christianity. Like, guys are there because they needed to be there for sort of social, community, maybe even business reasons. But their Christianity was really very just an identity. It wasn't a practice, or even really a fundamental belief. I think today the primary issue that men are facing is loneliness and
yeah,
isolation. And all the research shows this. Pew did a study on loneliness and talked about, how many people said they had um, at least one close friend 20 years ago versus now. And it's like one-fourth as many men say they have at least one close friend as they did 20 as the men said 20 years ago. So again, social media has a lot to do with that. The COVID really hyped that up because so many people went hybrid or work from home,
yeah,
and yeah, it's just nuts. So loneliness is the I think loneliness is the issue facing men today, especially young men today. And men are, but they're hungry for relationship, and they will take the opportunity to engage in relationship when they're invited into it. And that's a lot of what we're focusing our efforts on right now is how do we mobilize and equip mature guys to go engage with younger guys in a meaningful relationship, um, and um, uh, and make a difference. And that's how you can make a difference in somebody's life, is just presence and proximity, as one local pastor said to me.
yeah. So you kind of started answering my next question. So that's the biggest challenge in your opinion that men are facing
Yeah.
today. What would be another one or two that you would say in your experience that men are challenged with in our culture today?
Yeah, I think so. Loneliness would be a big one. I think anxiety and depression is sort of an offshoot of that. I don't know. Some people might debate the cause and effect, but I definitely think that especially with younger guys, there's just huge levels of anxiety. Again, I think social media drives that. I think there's probably some brain chemistry stuff going on with people staring at screens all the time, especially when you're
Yeah,
staring at screens where people are telling you about the best 5% of their life. Like, nobody's like, oh, I really screwed up at work today, and posting that on Facebook or Twitter.
yeah,
They're only talking about the great vacation they had, or their anniversary, or the accolade they got on LinkedIn, or whatever it is.
yeah.
So,
I try to tell, well, my wife and I, we tell each other this, but I tell, the students who are on social media and people, like, don't compare your real life to somebody else's highlight reel,
right, exactly.
because
Yep.
it's just going to leave you empty and questioning and wondering, like, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with our situation? Like, when you continue to compare your real life to someone
Yeah.
else's highlight reel, it's a
Yep.
dangerous thing to do.
Absolutely. And then I think obviously there's big economic strains, and we're seeing them really brightly right now, but it's been around for a while. Only about a third of men um, in their late 20s, early 30s are happy with their work. Labor force participation, if you look at young men in that same age group, it's a 19% unemployment rate, which is not good. Men were made
Right.
with a purpose. God put Adam in the garden to work it, and we've been designed for a purpose, from the first man. And if one in five of us aren't even engaged in in employment, you're going to have some angst in society about that. And then, it's driven by the education deficit and housing instability, I think probably feeds into that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like around here, I'm surrounded by young people. My church has a lot of young people in it. And like it's like they live in New York City or something. They're putting like 6 people in a 2-bedroom apartment. And
Oh
I'm like,
yeah.
why are you
Yeah.
doing that? And they're like, it's just so expensive. We can't.
Yeah.
And how do you get married? How do you get married and support your family when housing is so incredibly expensive? And so we're seeing that, right? The
Yeah.
age of marriage is getting older and older and older, and which is going to affect family dynamics and just ripples out through the church
Yeah.
and through society.
Well, as our time's coming to a close, I wanna ask you one more question. If you could give one piece of advice to men who are seeking to grow spiritually and lead better lives, what would that be?
Um,
I
well,
know
only
it's a
one.
loaded question. I know
Yeah,
it's a loaded question because there's
yeah.
many things that we can do. But give me one or two that you would suggest. Hey, this is what I would suggest starting to do now.
At a very, very fundamental, basic level, I'll say two things: pray and journal. Um, and some people might say, well, you should read your Bible more and you should be around more guys. All that's huge too.
Yeah.
Like
Yes. Yes.
finding a 2 a.m., 3 a.m. friend or two, engaging in a community at church, all stuff that you should do. But if you want to start somewhere, like start by spending time with God. Just
Yeah.
start there. Pray and and um just pray. And then I encourage guys to journal along with that, because I don't know about you, but like I'll sit down to pray and I stand up and I don't remember anything I prayed about. And
Mm,
or I'm angry about something and I need to just write it down. I need to get it down on paper. If I'm happy, even if I'm happy about something, to get it down on paper, not on a social media post, like on a book that only me and the Lord see. And so I often will journal my prayers out. I like to write down the things that I pray for and pray about. And then what's amazing to me is I'll flip back through that journal sometimes and I'll
yeah.
realize that like, hey, 3 or 4 months I was journaling about this. I was talking to God about this, and I don't even remember that, but like it's resolved. This thing happened that I was
Yeah.
talking to the Lord about a few months ago. And so that then builds your faith, and
Yeah.
then that will then drive you to scripture. That will drive you to relationship. That will drive you to service and sacrifice and to lead, provide, and protect for your family.
I love it. Yeah. No, thank. That's a good reminder for me too. I gotta get journaling more.
Yeah.
Um, but no, Brett, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on. Thanks for your help with the technology stuff. Want to thank our listeners for tuning in. Listeners, the best thing they could do if any of these podcasts add value to you, and maybe not directly to you, but value that you can pass to other men in your life, all I ask is that you like and share, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and just share this with men, as many men as you can, just so that this message and the messages that we've given and the messages that we're going to give have the greatest impact possible. But Brett, I want to thank you again for coming on. Can our listeners connect with you anywhere, social media wise, website, email? How can our listeners, if they want to connect with you, connect with you?
Yeah, we have a pretty robust website at manandthemirror.org with tons of free resources, articles. We have a YouTube channel, Man in the Mirror Ministry YouTube channel, that you can see our stuff. And then our socials, we're on the socials. You can just search for Man in the Mirror. You will get a lot of Michael Jackson stuff, but if you search for Man in the Mirror Ministry or Man in the Mirror, then you'll find us there as well.
that that did like pop in my head as I was getting ready for this interview. Was that song by Michael Jackson?
I
I
will.
was
I'll tell you a quick story. You can edit it out if you want, but
no, no.
Pat wrote the book in '89, gave the book to the publisher. The book was 3 months from coming out, and Michael Jackson released that song. So the book was already titled. I mean, it's from James. There's a verse in James about taking a look in the glass or a look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Um, And then Michael Jackson releases that song, and I think there'd actually even been another song 20 or 30 years before with a similar name.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. That's
song comes
hilarious.
out, it explodes, and the publisher was like, well, it's just a song, it'll go away,
Yeah.
and the rest, so
Yeah.
for 38 years we've been hearing it, or
Yeah, I
35
was gonna say
years.
here we are in 2025 and it's still
Yeah,
playing.
yeah. So
Awesome. Hey, Brett, thanks again for coming on.
thank you, man.
Blessed to have you on. Appreciate it. And hope everything continues to go well for the ministry.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.
Got it.
All right.